since that dreaded pandemic no less than 5 years ago now. Well, technically 5 years and 4 months give or take, that we'd rather no longer speak of a certain search has overtaken the internet, or at least did. The iceberg, a niche genre of YouTube video that thrives even now, getting hundreds of thousands of views on channels like Kappa Dance, Blamit and George, Wendigoon and Gambado Gaming, has far extended beyond its early, far more niche beginnings. It all started around 2020 with the release of the Super Mario 64 iceberg that kickstarted a trend, completely transforming the meter of YouTube for months after its release, a video that remains in deep mythos even now. Its legacy extends mainly for one reason, for one particular entry on the iceberg that has fascinated millions and struck fear into the hearts of nostalgic 90s kids everywhere. Every copy of Super Mario 64 is personalized. Many a conspiracy and many a creepypasta has been born ever since this simple concept got popularized. It gave us memorable fan games like B3313 and many probable hundreds of videos to sleep to. It's given, obviously, many people nostalgia too, allowing many who had strange experiences or heard thrilling rumors as a kid to re-experience that same thrill as pre-internet gaming rumors. It's also given us many an analog horror series like Super Mario 64 Classified. Why do I give this lengthy introduction though? Why do I feel the need to explain all of this in such strenuously autistic detail? Well, it's simple. What if this concept was done with Pokémon, specifically the consistently most broken and mysterious Pokémon games ever released? No, not the most recent Pokémon games. Believe me, they're nothing on these games. I'm talking about the 1995 releases, Pokémon Red version and Blue version in the West and Pokémon Green version in Japan, otherwise known as Pokémon Generation 1. What if every copy of Pokémon Red, Blue and Green are personalized? It probably sounds like a meme, I know, but trust me, run with me on this. What if? Think of every weird thing you experienced back in the day as a kid that never seems to happen on a simulated ROM hack. Every time the Lavender Town music sounded just a little different in pitch or rhythm, or every weird trainer that seemed to come out of nowhere, or no matter where you went could never fight again. Every time a Pokémon cried the wrong cry, or you found a patch of grass that seemed out of place or outright impossible to exist in that location. What if all of these were due to with a seemingly endless variation of copies Nintendo created before the game ever officially released? Instead of a personalization AI like with Super Mario 64, several million hand-curated experiences created by team leads Satoshi Tajiri and Shigeru Miyamoto? It's an interesting thought, right? Really gets the nostalgia pumping and brain whirring into action, questioning every decision that's brought you to where you sit, lay or stand right this very second. To quote Satoshi in 1997, "The shape of a forest, the Pokémon that appear." I wanted to make a game that would be different for everyone, but it was difficult. Now usually people would counteract this by saying simply that, well, this quote proves that they never followed through with the idea, you autistic retard. But my counter-argument is this. Have you ever encountered something that simply shouldn't been there, or perhaps seen something you weren't supposed to see? Maybe a glitchy sprite Pokemon encountered without the proper steps as if it was supposed to be something else. A text box given to an NPC that wasn't ever supposed to talk, or even a held item moved from one spot to another spot seemingly in between two playgrounds of the same game. Yuck, that would meet my criteria for personalization. So to finish off this little introduction to my concept and to finish my thesis, I will quickly list out what constitutes as an anomaly, sign of personalization and unusual entity in your Pokemon red, blue or green cartridges. Some of the most common anomalies would never be noticed if you weren't explicitly looking for them. Such anomalies including key items shifted 1 or 2 tiles in one direction from their usual place, a tile or texture to have a few additional or less pixels, a tile or texture to be swapped with a similar tile texture that has usually only color or dimensional differences, a house building having 1 or 2 less tiles on their edges where it'd be covered by replaced tiles being stretched out, NPCs standing a few tiles shifted in a certain direction by 1 or 2 movements, and NPCs having slightly differently worded dialogue like Sailor Leonard, where he typically says, "I like feisty kids like you," but it's possible for this dialogue to most commonly have the word feisty replaced with crazy or troublesome or silly and even stinky. Other common signs of personalization can be even more subtle than that. One notable occurrence is bits of lore being changed or swapped out, often giving it completely different meanings. A notable example of this would be the diary in the Cinnabar Mansion, in which you initially learn about the creation of Mutuo. The most common journal entry to be changed is the first one, in the release normal version of the game, saying "Diary, the 5th of July, Diana, South America. A new Pokemon was discovered deep in the jungle." Notable alterations have been subtle, such as the date changing from July 5th to January 6th, July 4th, January 1st, February 2nd, December 4th and even July 22nd. Another notable alteration is the nation occasionally saying Colombia or Peru or even Cuba. Finally, I constitute a sign of personalization as unknown entities appearing unannounced, entire dialogue being added in or taken away, new areas of the game appearing, and even Pokemon outside of the initial 150 not just appearing with full models and unique moves, but being catchable and usable as well. Extreme degrees of personalization can also include notable figures and items from creepypastas, or even figures from unreleased games like a floating pink Pokemon described by the girl at Mount Moon, sometimes randomly appearing and looking like a sort of rounded balloon like Jigglypuff, bearing only surface-level similarities to Nuna and Nishana from Generation 5. To summarize, a real sign of an anomaly includes tiles moving, unknown Pokemon and NPCs sometimes appearing, dialogue changing, dialogue being added in, dialogue being taken out, and other such corruptions that change just little aspects of the games, adding to a sort of liminal feeling that you can't quite explain. Unlike what I'm sure many are hoping, no, creepypastas are not entirely true but can have elements from them carrying over, like glitches where uncounted songs. Something like White Hand or Buried Alive, even in personalized copies, are still just fiction, unfortunately. Now that we have all that boring logical stuff out of the way, it's about time we get into all of the notable examples of corruptions, personalizations and new discoveries made from my research on these personalized copies. Only a few hundred are known to exist though, so remember that these are incredibly rare and these are mostly cherry-picked and probably will never happen to you. If you do happen to have one of these few hundred personalized copies, I hope that this helps as a sort of guide to discovering and naming some of these oddities for yourself. The first time I encountered this bizarre mystery was actually on my old copy of the Japanese green version. Yes, I used to collect cartridges, sue me dickhead, when I was replaying it about 5 or 6 years ago. It started out as a normal adventure, using Google Translate to get me through the tutorial dialogue and laughing at some of the bizarre translations whilst breezing my way through the first 2 gyms with Bulbasaur as my starter. After Misty's gym, I decided to try to catch Mew, using the golden nugget bridge as most people use, catching an Agra and pressing start on the grass, avoiding the trainer with the teleporters you would, yada yada. However, suddenly my game froze. Instead of getting into a battle and hearing the familiar music, I heard an alternative version of the song. Usually the Generation 1 battle theme begins with an upscaling arpeggio. This is a music theory term to describe breaking up a group of 3 notes played together, otherwise known as a chord, into individual notes being played in succession. However, in this case it was a more erratic series of notes seeming to be in a disharmonious middle ground between the major and minor keys before just stopping dead into silence as if the track was unfinished. After this, a sprite of a never-before-seen grey, almost Kangaskhan-like Pokemon appeared on the screen, something that should be impossible in Generation 1, and took a few steps towards my character. This whole time I thought my screen was frozen because there was no sound and I was unable to move my character. However, once I regained control, I realized that whatever this was, it seemed to almost be a cutscene, as after I regained control, the sprite began running after me with the silence still deafening. It seemed impossible to escape. The sprite was able to run whilst I was only able to walk, leaving it to quickly catch me, causing my game to just go black and then reload back at my last save. Again I was met by the sprite and the cutscene of its introduction before having to try to run away from Route 24 and onto Nugget Bridge to escape once more. Still, though, I was easily caught and my screen went black. On attempt number 3 I decided to try something I knew wouldn't work, or thought wouldn't work, pressing B to run. Miraculously enough it worked. I was able to run surprisingly fast, faster than any of the other games, and dart across Nugget Bridge where the sprite got to the middle of the bridge, suddenly stop, and then the game freeze again before the sprite just disappeared as if it had never been there in the first place. Obviously this scarred me slightly. It seemed so unreal, like something from a dream. It felt like I was experiencing something truly unique the whole time, like I was the only person to ever experience this like ever. I went to the online forums and read it to see if this was true in any retrospect, to see if maybe I just had some sort of daydream and imagined the whole thing. After a few hundred comments and replies, it seemed to confirm my daydreaming suspicions. However, after I decided to do some digging of my own, I managed to dig up many stories from the deep web and old forums which were similar to mine. I even found one story with an event very similar to mine occurring, with the only difference being that the sprite was of a bug-like creature with a square head and big stalk eyes. This is how I was inspired to create this list. This is the moment I realized that every copy of Pokémon Red, Blue and Green could be personalized. Another more notable and major personalization I've heard is from a 4chan post in 2011. I will quote the post in full since it is quite short. So I was playing my old copy of Pokémon Blue the other day, feeling some nostalgia and wanting to go and beat some trainers I probably forgot to beat the last time I played about a decade ago. It was normal for the time being, just went to the safari zone and caught a tourist and an execute which I was missing for some reason. After that I then decided to just go look around Planet Town in the post-game because I remembered all the old schoolyard rumors of Pokégoods and catchable starter Pokémon that existed around there, though this is where things started to go wrong. Suddenly, just as I entered onto Route 1, the music changed. I'd never heard this song before. It started out in a minor key instead of a major key. It also seemed to use a lot more dissonant and harsh notes than the theme would typically use, making me already begin to feel unsettled. That's then when I got a sudden Pokemon encounter, which luckily enough had the normal music to it. The Pokémon I encountered though was not normal. In fact, it didn't look like a Pokémon that should be in any Pokémon game. I swear guys, this is not a creepypasta. It looked almost like a Nidorino with curved spikes on its back and big round ears, but its eyes were rounded and almost soulless looking, whilst it's more stretched outwards and rounded out at the tip with only two large fangs on its upper jaw. Its tail looking sort of like a big chunky sausage. I think I forgot to mention that its sprite was looking towards me BTW and it was like turned half around. I tried to catch the Pokémon, but every time I clicked on the Pokeball an error text box showed up and stopped me. I tried to use different Pokeballs, but every time the same error text box happened. It was crazy. Eventually I just gave up and tried to kill it, but my level 87 Charizard's Flamethrower only did I think like 5% of its health before the Pokemon just one-shot my Charizard with some weird move I'd never seen before called Mega Blast, making me switch into my level 60 Blastoise and quickly run from the battle. Though I never returned to the normal screen, instead I got the blacked out text box before my screen glitched out and I just got teleported into Sabrina's gym for some reason. So I think I found a Pokégood. IDK, but please guys don't ban me, I'm not trolling. This is not a creepypasta, I promise that I'm being legit here. Please help me solve WTF happened. So yay, this is probably an even more overt story of personalization. Note how the player has two different starter Pokémon instead of just one. Considering that the Charizard was level 87 whilst the Blastoise was only level 60, the user must have caught a Squirtle later on in the wild and not thought about it. The mention of pocketbeds and playground rumors seem to indicate that chances are the user didn't explore in the usually blocked-off grass like the playground rumors used to say. They must have encountered the Squirtle Wartortle in the wild. Another story I came across in my earlier days of digging in is even shorter because it's not really a story at all. I found it on some old Pokemon forum that seemed later to around 2005 or 6 that mostly just had different players giving each other tips or theorizing about lore on message boards whilst a few people kept game guides on how to beat the latest Pokemon games, which at that point were Pokemon Ruby and Pokemon Sapphire. However, in a seemingly barely ever seen corner of the website I came across what seemed to be a blog with 4 pictures. The text had been removed or moderated for a long time, but the pictures remained with small descriptive text underneath them. The first picture was a picture of Viridian Forest, but it didn't look like the normal Viridian Forest. It didn't have any corners of shadows, instead seeming to be almost shaped like a semicircle and repeating infinitely throughout multiple exit and entrance points. The little text below it just reading, Viridian Forest being a different shape. I couldn't really get out of it cause it kept looping. The second picture was a picture of the truck that presumably, according to childhood legend, Mew would be under. In the picture though the truck isn't there, instead the place it would normally be just covered by a normal, albeit out of place looking rock texture, presumably from Mount Moon or Diglett Cave. The text underneath it just reading, "Don't think this was here last time." Finally, the third picture showed the back sprite of a Marowak in a battle against a very odd-looking gloom. Instead of a navy blue like usual, the gloom was more of a bright grey shading. The Marowak though had spines travelling down its back and a more angular skull than usual, with what appeared to be either a glitchy texture or literal gaping hole in its back. The text below the picture just reading, "I think the Pokemon are diseased." Now I don't think I really have to name all of the personalizations I noticed here, but I'll just point out a few of the less obvious ones, for the sake of those of you looking to continue my work after finishing this video. I think the first one is pretty self-explanatory, so I'll just jump ahead to the second picture, whereas you can clearly see my explanation from earlier can come in useful. This appears to be a more common personalization technique of simply swapping in textures that look similar and distorting them to fit a new context, albeit to a more extreme degree than usual. In the third picture, the personalization becomes extremely obvious, with the Marowak back sprite seeming to have been swapped out for its beta version, though where the hole comes from I still have no idea. Whilst the gloom is clearly discolored somewhat, this could just be a glitch instead of personalization, though considering how broken these games are. Of course I did more digging, cross-referenced the images and writing styles, searched up and down different forums and internet archives, but found nothing, well, nothing from the same user anyway. What made it particularly difficult was that the website I found these on didn't have usernames for whatever reason, so it was impossible to really track cross-websites. After all else failed, I ended up just reverse searching the images, hoping to find something from them, which is how I ended up finding an even more mysterious image, though I don't think it comes from the user themselves. There was no text, just a single image of the trainer sprite standing in the middle of some tall grass in the middle of the route. At first it seemed pretty normal, but then, like an AI-generated image, the moment I took a slightly closer look, the entire image unfurled itself and its mysteries before my very eyes, my mind becoming thoroughly unsettled. The trainer sprite wasn't one of the usual ones. It wasn't red or blue or heck even green. It was some weird long-faced trainer sprite with long curly hair and a brown color palette instead of a red or blue one. The grass itself was painted in more of a circular shape instead of the rectangular shapes it normally is in Gen 1, looking more like a Gen 2 route than a Gen 1 route. It was unmistakably Gen 1 though, since the rest of the colors were the usual black and white characteristic of only Pokemon Red and Blue. Plus I saw what appeared to be a cool trainer sprite in the corner indicative of Route 25 near Cerulean City. Trying to track down the source of this image though resulted in no favors. Even when reverse searching I found no other images even similar to this one. It was truly unique. In a dead end I just gave up on the search and moved on to something else. These searches typically end up like this. The whole personalization thing being so rare and unknown that it's nigh impossible to properly identify actually personalized images. It's then even harder to find their sources of their sequels, prequels. This next occurrence is a lot more recent, having only occurred to me late last year whilst I was pulling an all-nighter watching YouTube videos, more specifically nostalgic older YouTube videos. Now I was far too tired and brain dead at that point to even properly read what the name of the video was, unfortunately. So I have only the notes I wrote for myself whilst I was watching it to remember, and have not been able to properly track down the video since, though I think I may have found a screenshot from the video whilst writing the script for this one though. The video was an old let's play of somebody's old Pokemon Blue cartridge. It seems to have been one of the final videos since they were getting ready to challenge the Cinnabar Gym. Made around 2012 with most of the commentary of the video revolving around shit-talking the newest games, which at that point were Pokemon Black, White 2. It was around the 3-minute mark where I noticed something wrong with the footage just as they were in the Pokemon Mansion. Instead of Ditto, the Pokemon they were encountering were Weedle, Grimers and Ghastlies, which is not normal for the Pokemon Mansion, which in every version of Kanto at floor B1F would be Raticats and Vulpix and such, the only normal of these encounters being the Grimers. What was even weirder though was that when the Let's Player tried to catch one of the Ghastlies, the Pokeball immediately broke on impact with it as the Ghastly used a move I've never seen before, Soul Eater, where it put the Let's Player's Vulpix, which they seemed to have gotten before they normally would be able to, judging that they had it before they entered the Pokemon Mansion. To sleep before instantly coating it with soul damage, causing its health bar to go black instead of red when it fainted. I know this sounds like something out of a creepypasta, but as you've seen here, this is rare but not atypical for personalized cartridges. Afterwards the Let's Player simply retrieved his now fainted Vulpix and sent out their Butterfree, which they used to escape the clearly overpowerful Ghastly and quickly run back to the Pokémon Center on Cinnabar, where they healed their Pokémon. As if this wasn't enough evidence that their copy was clearly personalized, the Let's Player didn't react at all to this, instead acting as if this is all entirely normal and implying that it happens every time they come here. To quote from my notes, "Gosh, I should be more careful, guys. One of those ended a Nuzlocke of mine a few years ago. I shoulda remembered they're in their G's." After this the Let's Player re-entered the Pokémon Mansion and yet again made it to B1F, where they got past the dangerous Ghastly and found the pages of the diary as you would usually do. However, specifically journal entry number 3 was very different to how it normally is though. Instead of the normal entry which reads Diary the 6th of February, Mew gave birth, we named the newborn Pokémon Mewtwo. The journal read, Diary March 13, the Pokémon seized from the Forgotten Land had difficulties. Subject on life support. Again the Let's Player acted as if it had always been this way, not even acknowledging that they'd encountered a different journey entry before like you'd see in an emulator. The Let's Player actually started discovering his personal headcanons and theories as to what the mysterious land was, though I can't remember what the headcanons and theories were at the moment. The final thing on my notes is that the mansion has an additional room in this player's version, with the player around the 15-minute mark turning a corner on the second floor and entering what appears to be an empty room with just one repeating tile making up the walls and flooring, whilst an altar sits in the center of the room. The altar appears to be a brand new sprite not seen in the beta or release versions of the game. Something completely unique to this player's version of the game. When interacted with, the altar just pops up with the text box reading, "Don't touch what you don't understand," before some invisible force seems to push the player's sprite away. However, the Let's Player mentions an Easter egg and interacts with the altar 5 times before suddenly the altar asks a question, like the sort you'd see in the Cinnabar gym. "On what island do you find Cadden?" The player answered, "A place called Ho Island," and the altar moved aside, allowing the player to jump down the new hole. The Pokémon Mansion basement was a darkened room that the player had to use flash to see. After using flash, the room was revealed to be made up of rocky textures, seeming to be the same textures used in Cerulean Cave. On the walls and flooring made of what appear to be another new texture, being colored a light brown, or about as brown as you can get in Gen 1, making the room almost look like a beta version of the later used ruins of Alf in Generation 2. The player doesn't do much in the room though, just walking up to one of the walls where a text box appears reading, "Unknown letter-shaped Pokémon appear to be making a pattern," appearing before again an unseen force seems to push the sprite back, and the Let's Player announcing that this is the end of the Easter egg and using Fly to get back to Cinnabar Island. Though an interesting note is that on the map, for the split second it appears before the Let's Player flies back to Cinnabar, it shows that at the moment the player is somewhere far off the beaten path. Their identifying dot being way off in the border of the screen, seeming to be not even in Kanto anymore. It is also useful to note that this is a well-known visual bug with the game and might not mean anything. I've spent a long time trying to track down this video, but alas to no avail. If anybody watching this can find the video, then a link would be very much appreciated. Thank you. Also, just as an extra note, if anyone else makes discoveries of personalization, be sure to comment the link to where you've noted it, or if you've made a video on the topic, use the hashtag personalised Copperman or tag me in the video directly and I'll try and keep all of our collective research in a single playlist together. So this next occurrence is unfortunately another set of images, not anything exciting like a video, but it comes from an old CerebiNet thread from 2003 featuring a user named Menius260 documenting their experience exploring a supposed new island in their copy of Pokémon Red that they'd never seen before. The thread starts with a short introduction documenting how the player was surfing along the routes nearby Cinnabar Island when they noticed that an area they swear used to be blocked off by rocks could now be explored. Then proceeding to travel for nearly 20 minutes eastwards, encountering 0 Pokémon and 0 trainers until hitting a stretch of beach tiles with nothing but a sign to indicate that the player hadn't found themselves in Glitch City. The player approached the signs and interacted with it, noting how the resulting text box read, "Welcome to Hiwatu Island. Hope you brought flowers." The thread then splits into 2 pictures, with the first picture showing the water of the route taken to get the Hiwatu Island, the water textures seeming completely normal if not haphazardly repetitive as if they were done last minute. The second picture showing the beach of the island, which appears to have the same beach texture used on Cerulean Beach near Cerulean Cave. The thread then continues on to mention how the player then walked forward to be warped into what looked to be an edited copy of Viridian Forest, just with more left turns and less straight paths. The encounters in the tall grass, including what appear to be reverse-colored Butterfree, Beedrill, Bloom and Pinsir. The forest apparently seemed to stretch on forever, with the player ending up getting lost several times, eventually finding their way to what appears to be a semicircle section where they were met with a gauntlet of 3 trainers. They were just normal late-game bug catchers with 3 Pokémon teams consisting of random level 45, 47 and 50 bug-type Pokémon, though the previously mentioned Pokémon used their reverse-color versions rather than their normal versions. The thread then shows 3 pictures, with each picture depicting a different battle against the bug catchers. The first battle being an entirely normal battle against a level 47 Cyber, though it is worth to note that the player's level 42 Taurus has Fire Fang, which it can't normally learn by any method in Generation 1. The second picture depicts a battle against a normal-looking level 45 Metapod, with the weird part this time being that the trainer sprite is of a hiker class, not a bug catcher. The only difference being that it seems to have had one of the bug catcher's hats haphazardly put on it instead of the hiker hat, and a bug catching net placed in its hand instead of the cane a hiker normally carries. The third picture depicts presumably the third battle with the level 47 Pokémon the player is facing, being what appears to be the beta sprite version of Spinarak, a Pokémon that shouldn't be even considered by pre-release Generation 1. This being the catalyst to the overarching theory I have that everything to do with Pokémon Generation Generations 2 and 3 came from the butchered personalization assets made for Generation 1. The thread then continues on to briefly go over the rest of the player's adventures on the island, including a wild encounter and capture of a beta sprite spinrack, which has an unusually high base speed stat for a spinrack, with the speed stat at level 39 being 58, which places it as unusually higher than its released counterpart and beta counterparts in Generation 2. After that, another overworked sprite of a Pokémon can be seen on the bridge, this being only the second time I've seen this personalization, including my copy of the game mentioned earlier, leading to what appears to be a boss battle against a level 45 giant, which is a Pokémon that recently became well known for being an unreleased concept from when Pokémon was called Capsule Monsters. The boss battle is then described as fierce, with the giant being described as using new and overpowered moves like Dangerous Roar, which dealt a guaranteed 50 damage to the player's Pokémon. Super Stomp, which hit twice, with the second hit always being more powerful than the previous one. And the final new move being Flame Wave, which seemed to have a 100% chance of burning the player's Pokémon and dealing guaranteed 5% of their health in some form of coiling damage at the end of every turn. The player couldn't catch Giant and was forced to defeat it. After the Pokémon's defeat, a text box appearing reading "The beast has been vanquished." Hooray appeared before the sprite of the Pokémon lingered for just a few seconds too long, making the player feel uncomfortable before suddenly just popping out of existence. The thread then goes on to show two pictures of Giant during the battle, with the front sprite matching up exactly with what we see on the Gamma Freak art for Capsule Monsters. But the second sprite was Giant in the middle of using one of its attacks, showing it opening its mouth unnaturally wide and its neck-like sort of flaring outwards like an air sac. The thread then concludes with the player detailing how they went on to explore the rest of the island, with the island entirely being made up of routes following a single river with nothing but pink-colored Butterfree and Venomoth to catch, and several Viridian forest-like routes which seem to use the same textures as Viridian Forest but just displayed in slightly different directions, like one of the forests having more of a curving westward shape and another of the forests, seemingly the smallest of the forests, seem to make up an upside-down 5 shape when you look at it in isolation, the encounters in the forests being entirely made up of reverse-colored Kakuna, Beedrill, Bloom, Villaplume and even Wild Eevee. The player concludes by detailing how they caught themselves a reverse Pokémon of each species represented on the island before surfing back to Cinnabar Island to heal up their Pokémon. Now this doesn't technically end here, since the thread actually has a comment from the user by the name of Blazabana, presumably from just a few weeks after the thread was created, detailing their own shorter experience of personalization on a red cartridge that they bought from a second-hand dealership with only one picture attached. The story begins with a short introduction of how they'd grown up watching Digimon and not Pokémon in the 90s, but had recently been getting into Pokémon and went to get an old cartridge from their local second-hand seller to see if they'd like the games or not before investing in the newer releases that'd be a lot more pricey. The next section goes over how the game was just as they'd heard everyone talk about it for the first half of the game, with them picking Charmander as their starter because it was their favorite design, and went on to beat Brock, Misty, Surge and Erica all before Lavender Town, whilst having a team of 6 but only really using their cherries of nicknames Shitita and Nidoking called Urina Drinker. There are no signs of personalization in this part of the game apart from apparently a few glitches that were used just for fun purposes, so I'll quickly move on a few paragraphs to get to the meaty stuff. Obviously in Lavender Town, the picture they attached flashes up in this section showing a strange-looking humanoid Pokémon with ringed white eyes and a black coloring looking sort of like a cross between an upright Mew and a Croagunk. The sprite seeming to be inside of a text box or something. In Lavender Town, as things tend to do, the game supposedly begins to go awry with the Lavender Town music for whatever reason being switched for an upbeat, more child-friendly song that sounds almost like a bizarre hybrid of the Pallet Town theme and Viridian Forest theme. The player then details how they felt creeped out, like Lavender Town just had this brand new sense of intimidation and negative aura now that the theme had been swapped for an upbeat childish track. Like the town itself was trying to hide something from the player. Miraculously enough though, the player didn't notice anything else weird for a while. Nothing else that went against the stories they'd been told, until they got to the White Hand Trainer, where instead of asking if they believed in ghosts, the NPC instead said, "Did you lose someone close recently?" with the only option to respond being yes. Obviously creeped out, especially as the audio glitched around this point. The player restarted their game thinking that it was bugged. However, upon returning to Lavender Town, the changes remained. The NPC still asked if the player had lost someone close to them, and the music was still eerily upbeat and happy sounding, though nothing else seemed to have changed about the town. The player then made their way into the Lavender Tower and fought their way through channelers before fighting Blue, a clear and subtle sign of personalization, as usually you don't encounter channelers until after fighting Blue, before getting to where the Blue fight was supposed to be. However, Blue wasn't there. The player restarted their game again thinking that they were soft-locked, repeated everything up to that point, but miraculously enough Blue was still gone. Somehow their copy was different to the copy all their friends had been playing. The picture comes in next as the player just made their way to the stair where normally would be met by Miralax's ghost, but this time the music just stopped before the screen faded into battle against the strange Pokémon seen in the picture. Instead of a cry, it reportedly had what sounded like a distorted 8-bit version of an elephant call. Instead of music, a single note being bent up and down several octaves, and notes being the only thing the player could hear as they fought the strange Pokémon. The Pokémon, seeming to have the base stats of a high-level legendary, managed to quickly wipe the player's whole team, for some reason the level of the Pokémon being obscured by a glitchy text the whole fight. At this point the player was in between feeling afraid and feeling pure unfiltered gamer rage, probably on the verge of calling the dark-colored sprite several cancelable slurs, and so turned off the game with that picture. The picture of the sprite just as the strange Pokémon appeared, being the only evidence that this creepypasta sounding story is true. This might the almost frightening stories of personalization I've personally heard to this day. As for stories, those are the more interesting ones. To be honest, most personalization stories are just oh look, my game has a few extra grass tiles than normal, look guys, look. To be honest, it's hard work as well. If they're not clear-cut like these stories, it's oftentimes easy or just easier to discredit the accounts as just hoaxes or lacking enough evidence to be given anything but a slight critical eye. Even the ones that are obviously and verifiably personalized get quite repetitive. For instance, the past 5 cases I've investigated all are in the same area, Viridian Forest, and all include some variation of parts of the forest added, either being a few extra tiles of long grass or just a new repeating layer of textures that make the forest seem slightly more unsettling to some people, I guess. A few more notable cases without full investigations or actual stories behind them I'll list here as a sort of last hurrah for the video before I properly conclude. A few weeks ago I encountered a picture of Pewter City that had an extra house at the left corner of the town that seemed to have a slightly different house textures from the usual textures seen in Gen 1. Instead seeming to be the textures used to make Professor Birch's house in Generation 2. Again, another point in the corner of the theory that the content created for the personalization material eventually ended up getting turned into Generations 2 and maybe even Generations 3 and 4. A while ago, I think maybe 2 years ago, I encountered a short 10-second clip seemingly clipped from the speedrunner's live stream where instead of saying upon hearing Poké Flute, sleeping Pokémon will spring awake. It works on all sleeping Pokémon. After giving the speedrunner the Poke Flute, Mr. Fuji said, "Use the tool to knock the Pokémon out, don't worry, it won't hurt it unless it bangs its head too hard." The people in the comments seemed to be convinced that this was fake, though I beg to differ. I think 3 years ago I encountered a leaked sound sample from someone's copy of Pokémon Green on the forum somewhere, which was an incoherent mixture of 8-bit strings and pounding bass lines all running over each other as if the game was trying to process more than it could physically handle. If you don't know, old Gamma Boys could only handle 3 or 4 channels of sounds at the same time. In this leaked audio I heard about 7 or 8 samples trying to play at the same time, which probably caused the incoherent mess as the system's speakers all began to break trying to process all the data. The final smaller story comes from a decade-old message board where somebody just asked a simple question. Are guys why's an NPC Red appearing in my version of Pokemon Red now? Unfortunately, without any more context, I can't really say whether this is just a hoax or a troll or legitimate. To be honest, I can't even tell you what kind of personalization this player has experienced. Now I do remember encountering quite a few cases of boss fights randomly appearing, whether the boss fights being with Pokebids or even scrapped boss fights like with Professor Oak. The Professor Oak boss fight is definitely the most common among personalized copies that have boss fights. My best guess is that if this is real, then the player probably just has a boss fight version of Red in their game. Maybe it's an alpha version of the boss fight that could be eventually used for Generation 2. It also could be a leftover of an old system where you could play as either red or blue and the rival would change accordingly. much for watching